Have you ever noticed how some relationships with an avoidant start off with intense intimacy, the connection, the chemistry is there, but then suddenly fizzle out or even drastically change? What if the reason lies within something deeper than you think or even that you're aware of? Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about the avoidant and their very unique relationship to sex and intimacy. We'll talk about the hidden fears, the fascinating psychology behind avoidant attachment styles, and the surprising ways that these individuals experience passion, love, and vulnerability. And most importantly, we'll talk about what you can do if you're on the receiving end of a relationship like this, where things are not going in the direction that you were hoping for. And then at the end of this video, we'll talk about what you can do differently so that you can be in the right position that you're looking to be in when it comes to a relationship and connection. Now, this video today is actually taken from a clip from our podcast all about the dismissive avoidant attachment style and intimacy. And if you want to do a deeper dive into this, you can actually check out a course fully for free called Attachment Styles and Sex. And it will do a deep dive into talking a lot about these different components. And again, it'll be fully for free just for a limited time in the link below. I hope you enjoy this clip. And if you want to see the full episode that is on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as on this YouTube channel in a whole lot of detail, I will also put links for that too. Welcome back to Can This Be Fixed? A podcast all about real life questions where we answer your real life challenges that you may be facing with strategic solutions and really work to engage in healthy action steps for how to transform these challenging events. So, our next question here is all about intimacy, early sexual intimacy in relationships, particularly between a fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant attachment style. This is from Jamie out of North Carolina. And Jamie says, everything started out great in my relationship for the first 2 years, but over time, we started arguing more often. I think you refer to this as the power struggle stage of dating, about 2 years or so in. It was at this point that I noticed a big change in my sex life with my partner as well. I am fearful avoidant. He is dismissive avoidant. And I found that the more I talked about this or brought this up, the worse things seemed to get. I feel like we are still at a standstill and I don't know what to do. I don't want to be in a sexless relationship. So let's talk about this. So, Jamie mentioned something really important here, which is the power struggle stage of relationships. Now, this is originally based off of the work of Dr. Susan Johnson, but I've sort of adapted to separate out a dating stage from a honeymoon stage because I found them to be very unique and separate stages. So, if we look at our 6 stages of relationships, we have number one, our dating stage. This is where we vet somebody in a relationship. Number two, we have our honeymoon stage. Okay, this is where we put on the rose colored glasses. And that dating stage generally lasts between about 0 to 6 months before, if we make it to the next stage, we basically make some form of commitment towards either a monogamous relationship or to focus on prioritizing each other more. And this is what really moves us through the rite of passage into the honeymoon stage. It's in the honeymoon stage that we will then see this last for another somewhere between 6 months up to a year and a half post dating stage. And where we have those red rose colored glasses on, we see everything through, all of the beautiful qualities about our partner. And sometimes we even filter out the challenging parts. And as we get really comfortable with somebody over time, we then move into the power struggle stage. We get comfortable enough, essentially, where we drop the mask. We start feeling really, really safe with somebody. We end up showing more of ourselves. And in doing so, we may find that we start to see things about somebody else that we didn't notice to begin with. Now, the rite of passage to move out of the power struggle stage is acceptance and vulnerability. But if we don't know how to accept our partner's flaws, and if we don't know how to be vulnerable in a healthy way about our own, then instead what we'll find is that statistically, most couples break up in the power struggle stage. And so this may be something very likely to happen here. So what do we do? Well, if we make it through the power struggle stage, and we'll talk about how to do this in Jamie's question, we end up in the stability stage, then the commitment, and lastly, bliss stage. And the bliss stage is really like the honeymoon stage, but where you've done a lot of inner work with the person. You really know who that person is. It's not like we're still getting to know them and the mask is on and everyone's on their best behavior. It's like we truly know somebody. So How do we foster this in this kind of relationship? Well, when we take a really clear look at this, Jamie says everything started out really great for the first couple of years, and then we started arguing more often. And as we started arguing more often, there was a change in our sex life. So, what often takes place is fearful avoidance when they communicate. They often communicate more reactively rather than proactively. We can also refer to this as negative framing versus positive framing. So, because fearful avoidants don't love to communicate their own needs because it feels vulnerable, often they won't say things like, "Hey, I would love for us to be more intimate in our relationship and spend more time focusing on that. What are fun things we can do to support the relationship in that?" That would be positive framing, right? We're talking about the solution in a healthy, positive way. But if we're scared to have that conversation, or if we have this deep down belief that we can't convey or communicate our needs, or even if we have shame just from talking about sex in general, then what can often take place is we don't communicate. And instead, we hold things in and we stuff them down. And then over time, we end up in a situation where these come out in reactive ways, negative framing. We say, "You're not caring about sex in the relationship," or "You're not making an effort," or "We never have sex and the relationship sucks." And we'll have a lot more criticism about it. Now, what do we know about the dismissive avoidant? Dismissive avoidants take criticism to heart, arguably more than any other attachment style. And so we set the stage for the more that we react and communicate in a negative framing way, the more likely it is that the dismissive avoidant will shut down and will really start to withdraw even more. Now, it's also very common when a dismissive avoidant is criticized, they actually think something's wrong with me. And I have had countless conversations over the last 12 years or so with dismissive avoidance, whether it's in our programs at the personal development school, whether it's in one to one client sessions back when I ran my practice, where what I would see is that dismissive avoidance would end up in a position where they, start to judge themselves and shame themselves around sex. And it actually affects their ability to be present and to really, engage in sex. It can really affect sexual performance in a sense if somebody's in their head and they're really stressed. And of course, that's going to happen, right? Because how can you be really present and feel connected with somebody in a sexual way, in a really vulnerable way, if you're scared of vulnerability, if you're shaming yourself through the process, or if you're walking on eggshells, worried that you're about to be shamed in some way? I'm not saying that every fearful avoidant is doing this by any means, but I am saying this is a very common dynamic I've seen come about. And so, one of the best things that we can do here is we can work through not just around sex, but around the whole relationship, getting better at communicating and facilitating a really safe space for vulnerability and emotional intimacy in a relationship first. This can look like wanting to work through challenges, checking in with each other more, making sure that we get really good at positive framing when we're communicating in a relationship, and even going out of our way to counteract each other's core wounds. If you listen to the core wound part of this podcast at the beginning, we talked a lot about those big core wounds each attachment style has. And in this particular case, if you look at the fearful avoidant with a dismissive avoidant, a huge thing that's really valuable to pay attention to is that if a defective core wound is present, somebody's going to be really busy shaming themselves. But if instead we can be more accepting rather than shaming, because really acceptance or even pride are the antidotes to shame because they are the opposite emotions. The more we can present with more acceptance, less judgment, more things that we can validate so somebody feels a sense of pride instead of shame, the more we give that in the relationship overall, and not even around sex particularly, but just starting with having roots of a foundation built into the relationship where that's there, the less the person who the big shame wounds is going to be projecting the shame out onto the relationship or onto sex and then fearing it and shutting down as a way to self protect. And so the more we have that sense of acceptance, pride, or validation and safety emotionally, the more we're laying the foundation for this person to then feel safe being vulnerable, which of course, sex is a vulnerable thing. And I find that it's necessary to make it through the power struggle stage between a fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant to get better at not negatively framing, instead positively framing, so that you can express your needs as a fearful avoidant, right? This isn't me just saying, make sure the DA has all their needs met. This is me saying, no, 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 get your needs met. The DA is way more likely to meet your needs in a healthy way when you positively frame and when they feel safe to be vulnerable and when they feel accepted by their partner. This is when they really rise to the occasion and show up. And when that is built in or sort of baked into the relationship in the background, then things in the foreground that are more, around intimacy or sex, they tend to move with that in lockstep. So what you'll tend to see is that the more there is this safety to be vulnerable, the more there's a sense of pride and acceptance in the relationship that the DA has, the more present they are around sex, the more sex feels like a fun thing and an exciting thing in the relationship rather than something that they can shroud in fear if they're afraid of their performance not being quote unquote good enough or defective in some way, or if they are feeling emotionally unsafe to really be present in that experience. So, positively framing your needs, still making sure you're communicating your needs as a fearful avoidant so that you can get them met is absolutely necessary for the fearful avoidant to make it through the power struggle stage of relationships. And that's not just around sex, I mean, needs in general. But then also baking into the relationship more acceptance between both of you, more positively framing when you're trying to work through problems and communicate. And also making sure that there's a sense of validation or things that will induce a sense of pride in the relationship will then build the foundation for intimacy in all forms to be much more celebrated in the relationship overall. So, that's it for these three questions today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to ask your own questions, you can go to Can This Be Fixed on Reddit, post your own questions there, comment on other individuals' questions, or see some of the questions that people are asking around attachment styles and the subconscious mind and these topics that we discuss here on this channel. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for sharing, for stopping by, for being here. Please subscribe to this podcast or YouTube channel if you are enjoying this.